Islands, Radio Cayman.
Shining down from above.
We love our listeners.
Radio Cayman in the Cayman Islands.
Live from Radio Cayman Studio, this is
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community.
A very good morning and warm welcome to Money Sense. Last show, we had the very great pleasure of having two asset allocators in the studio live with us. They were here on island for the Cayman Alternative Investment Summit, an annual conference that takes place here. Many fascinating topics were discussed during the show, but there are two elements I'd like to say a few extra words about. The first was the confirmation by these two asset allocators, and by many others who control the largest pools of money on the planet, that they are increasingly allocating money, their investors' money, remember, and when we say investors, we mean regular people like us with pension savings. They are increasingly allocating money away from what are known as traditional assets. Now, traditional assets incorporate things such as cash, bonds, equities, the stuff that we normally are used to buying when we invest. Now, allocating away from this doesn't mean not investing in traditional assets. It means making more investments in different asset types. So what it means is that they're allocating an ever increasing amount. Once upon a time it was 0, then it became 5, then 10, then 15, and nowadays we're seeing some of these big investment managers allocating as much as 30 to 40% of their total portfolios away from those things that we're most common with. So they're not investing 40% of their money in those traditional things such as cash, bonds or equities. So what does that mean? And why are they doing it? Why are some of the world's largest endowments, why are some of the world's largest pension plans investing so much money in these other asset types? And should we be doing the same sort of thing? Now, the reason to bring this up is not to say that everyone should actually rush out and invest in hedge funds, invest in venture capital funds, invest in private equity, or some of these other alternative assets. I'm going to say more on that later. But to highlight the direction that the smartest investors in the world have been heading for over a decade and are increasingly heading. This is important in a number of ways. And it's important for each and every one of us who is listening to this show today because the law in the Cayman Islands, as it affects the private sector, explicitly actually prohibits investments in these assets in your pension. Now that's quite an interesting dilemma, because here we are seeing the world's largest investment managers increasingly moving money away from these traditional asset types. And yet, the law here in Cayman prohibits managers from doing the same sort of thing. Now, is that a problem? Is that something we should be happy with? I'm not going to draw any conclusions, I'm just stating the facts as they exist on the ground. Indeed, this could be a problem, and it's one that investors should be very mindful of, because if the smartest people out there, the smartest people managing the biggest sums of money, are saying it's appropriate and sensible to move money to other asset types, then at the very least we should pay attention as to why they're doing so. It doesn't mean we should do so, it just means we should be paying attention more closely to that. And we also should think about whether that means we should be changing, or at least thinking about changing, the rules and regulations that govern how our money can be invested. So, what that means is that as we learn more about these asset types, as we learn more about the risks associated with them, potentially we should be talking to our elected representatives and saying to them, hey, we need to be smarter about how we're able to allocate our money, because it's very important for our lifetime savings to have that money properly allocated. Remember, as it stands at the moment, you can't allocate the money in that way. Now, the second point I want to make is that individual investors need to be very mindful of something that one of our guests on the last show mentioned, which is following fads. Just because others are doing something does not mean that it is the right thing for all investors to be doing. The dot-com bubble, for goodness sake, should have taught us all that. Thus, although it is right and sensible for us to agitate for laws to be adjusted, it's also necessary that people behave cautiously and step gently into areas that they are unfamiliar with. If you don't understand the basics of what you're investing in, you probably shouldn't be investing in it. If you don't understand the basics of Bitcoin, if you don't understand the basics of private equity, then you shouldn't be investing in it. You should first of all learn more about it and then think about investing in it. Indeed, many people have financial advisors. Now, if your financial advisor says to you to invest in something which you're unfamiliar with, you should ask your financial advisor to explain it better to you so that you have an understanding of it. That's a really crucial thing. Just because an advisor says you should do something doesn't mean you should always do it. You should pay more attention yourself to what it is people are telling you to invest in. Now, that's way more than enough editorializing for myself. We are going to take a short break, and then after that, we're going to have an extended conversation with Christina Chi on the future of the investment industry, the role of technology, and learn what high-frequency trading really is.
Preventing dengue is as simple as preventing mosquito bites. Use a mosquito repellent, wear protective clothing, and stay indoors during early dawn and dusk when mosquitoes are most active. Control the places around you where mosquitoes breed. Remove stagnant water in outdoor and household settings. As a weekly habit, persons should change the water in vases, clear the water in saucers under potted plants, and ensure air conditioner drip trays are free of stagnant water. Outdoor objects capable of holding water should be kept empty and preferably disposed of or put into dry storage if not used. These include open bottles and tins, watering cans, buckets, empty paint tins, and old vehicle tires. Do your part to control the spread of dengue. The dengue virus is an infectious disease transmitted through mosquito bites. Symptoms may come on as early as 4 days or as late as 3 weeks following an infection. There is no vaccine or specific medication to treat dengue. Symptoms of dengue include high fever, headache, pain behind the eyes, joint and muscle pain, and rash. If persons have any of these symptoms, they should go to the nearest health center or hospital. It is advised to drink lots of liquids and avoid medication that contains aspirin.
Radio Cayman, maintaining the innovation.
On a daily basis, making it easy to connect with you, our listeners. Add us to WhatsApp today, 925-3261. That's 925-3261.
Radio Cayman.
Send a text or voice note.
Can I send a request, please?
You don't really have to ask us. Just send a request.
This is a shout out to my ex.
Radio Cayman, the voice of the Cayman Islands.
Radio Cayman, maintaining the innovation.
This is Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community. Brought to you by the CFA Society Cayman Islands.
And now, more Money Sense.
Welcome back to the show and an extended second half when we're going to have a conversation with Christina Chi on the future of the investment industry, the role of technology, and learn what high-frequency trading really is. Christina is the CEO of Domeyard, which is among the longest-running high-frequency trading hedge funds in the world. Now, Christina, let me start off, if I may, with a fairly basic question, which is, what is high-frequency trading?
Well, first off, thank you for having me, Simon.
Pleasure.
I really appreciate being on your show. This is great. So high-frequency trading, I guess a high-level definition is basically we're making many trades per day at very high speeds. That's basically all we're doing. There's nothing more complicated than that. You know, we're not doing front running or anything else. I don't know if anyone's read Flash Boys before. We don't actually do any of that. That's mentioned in the book, but rather all we're doing is taking data, making some insights from the data, and making many trades, to like thousands of trades during the day. So we might be in and out of the market within, like a split second, within less than a second. And it's really exciting because the difference is we're just looking at things on a very micro level instead of a macro level like other firms do.
So you're looking at what's going on in the trading market as opposed to what's going on perhaps in the world, more in a bigger picture.
Oh yeah, sort of like that. So we look at the data at like a very nanosecond granularity as well.
Who's trading what at what level of activity?
Exactly. So it's like if you take a biology class, we're like the bacteria. You look at like microbiology and the things that you can't see with your eye.
I've never heard a guest introduce themselves or explain themselves as like bacteria.
Yeah, compared to biology textbook.
That's different.
So it's a difference. Yeah.
But high frequency trading has itself had some bad press. Mm-hmm. It's been accused of, I think I've read things that it's been accused of the downfall of Western civilization in certain perhaps popular magazines. Mm-hmm. Why is that, and what is the issue that people are trying to say that it has?
Well, like most innovations, the innovations behind high frequency trading, came from, it's true, it came from a place of, greed and just very questionable activities of, let's say, a lot of data is transmitted through microwave towers. So in Flash Boys, they talk about how they were, blasting holes under the river, over the, under the mountain, and trying to get the fastest wire just to be a little bit faster than somebody else so they can make millions of dollars per year. And that is controversial, something that we should question and be like, why are we doing this, right? But today, the good news is that actually those microwave routes are, they're not owned by individual companies, they're owned by vendors. So we, as a startup, we're 8 years old. I don't know if you can call us a startup, but we will pay the same vendor the same price that Goldman Sachs pays, and we get the same speeds as any large firm out there, which is great. So the field has been democratized a lot, I think, over the last couple of years. But that bad press about they call that front running, where people are buying order flow. I'll explain that. So there's this thing that Michael Lewis calls front running, which is basically buying order flow.
So there's a whole bunch of people who say, I want to buy some Microsoft. They put it into their broker's system, and the broker says, I've got thousands of people who want to buy Microsoft at this particular price, and they sell that data, don't they, potentially to some people, and people do stuff with that.
Right, so good examples, like my parents, they trade on an app called Robinhood, right, as a new startup. Well, they're now they're $1 billion company, but so Robinhood is free, right? It's a $0 brokerage, and the question is, well, there's no such thing as free lunch here, right? If it's a $0 brokerage, then chances are you are the product. They're selling your data somewhere, and that's what they're doing. They're selling data to those so-called, Michael Lewis calls them front runners. These big banks, Citigroup buys it, Goldman Sachs, every big bank you can think of buys this order flow, and then will place trades, based on that order flow before it gets actually sent to the exchange.
There is a sense, someone listening to this will say, but aren't I supposed to be, when I buy something, am I not supposed to be buying it as opposed to telling other people I'm buying it? Because if you tell someone you're buying something, presumably they would put the price up against you, and then you've paid more than you should have done.
Right.
So how do we overcome that argument and that concern that people have?
Right. I mean, it's unfortunately, if you're paying $0 to make a trade, right? So chances are somebody's paying someone out there.
So you're saying that's the compensation you get for not paying commission.
Exactly.
You have to give up something in compensation.
You might get a price, you might be executing the trade at a price that you don't want, or you're making a little less money than you would have had you, gone for a firm that doesn't sell their data. But the same goes for other industries. Like Facebook is a great example. Facebook is free. We don't, pay for it, but they make all their money by selling all your data to other businesses out there that buy it.
One of the things that a lot of academic research says is that investors trade too much, and not because they trade too much, but because the cost of trading eats away at returns. So that almost is saying, well, some of these high frequency firms who are paying to access data, if you take the cost of trading down to zero, Robinhood's example, then you could potentially get into a situation where retail investors could be better off in that scenario because they're not spending so much on commissions. Is that a plausible argument?
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, we don't know how much you might be losing by going for a $0 brokerage, right? Versus paying. It used to be like $6 or $7 per trade. It used to be quite a lot, or they would charge a percentage commission. Some of these brokers, and that could add up a lot over time. And so I think it really depends on what you're trading and what you're looking at here as well. So yeah, it's tough to really say which one. I wouldn't argue that one is better than the other. I think it's just what you think is better for yourself.
But you said your parents are on the Robinhood trading platform, so you haven't told them not to.
It's because they're poor, and I'm like I get it. They're from that environment, and they don't want to have to spend that much money per trade, and they don't know how much their data is being sold out there, and to them it doesn't make enough of a difference to justify going on some other more traditional expensive platforms. So, yeah.
Now, so one of the reasons I was so interested in having you come on the show was because high frequency trading in and of itself is a trading strategy, is a style of investing. But it derives its ability, the only way you can do high frequency trading is by the use of data and by computing power and such like. And the general theme of this show that we're trying to achieve here is sort of to say, is there a future for humans in this industry with the proliferation of data?
Right.
And with the ability of computers to mine information faster than we ever could as humans? What role do we as humans have in this sort of environment? I mean, that's a big question. We can drill down into some elements of it. But what's your general thought on that?
That's It's a really great question and topic. One of the biggest misconceptions in high frequency trading is that we're just letting the robots take over the world, and there's that fear that people, the media creates all this fear about robots and AIs, trading and taking over the world. But in reality, the truth is that it's a very early stage for machine learning and AI and trading. And in fact, these AIs are extremely dumb, which is what we've realized over time. They're as smart or as dumb as the humans behind the scenes. And I'll give you a really good example. So IBM Watson, you might have heard of Watson from Jeopardy, how it beat Ken Jennings, and that's wonderful and great for a game like Jeopardy. AlphaGo, with Google as well, beating the best Go players in the world. And apparently the best Go player resigned because he's like, AI is better than me. It's kind of sad, But in trading, we don't see that, which is interesting. So IBM Watson has an ETF, actually. Like, they created an AI-based tradable, an ETF. And this ETF, this fund, they have underperformed even the S&P 500. They've been performing terribly, which means, like, are they really that smart? When I had high expectations for this, these are Watson, I'm sure they have, hundreds of people work. I don't know how many people who work on Watson itself, but it's AlphaGo is a $25 million project. It's really expensive. They spent a lot of money on this, and they still can't make money from the markets. And so just really disappointing almost to see how far behind it is. And we do have some theories as to why, why these AI can't beat the market. I think the number one reason is that the data in this space is constantly changing. And finance is still, it's a largely human-driven. The markets are always changing. There's always events going on. There's private companies. Tesla's valuation going crazy because of something, out there, or Elon Musk makes a tweet, and then the markets go up or down. That kind of stuff happens. It's a human-driven market at the end of the day because it's humans who run these companies. And so long as it's human-driven, you can't have a system like AlphaGo, beat the human financial markets. It just doesn't work that way. Whereas the game of Go or chess, any game like that, they're perfect, complete games, right? Like,
it has rules.
Rules, yeah. The rules have never changed over thousands of years or whatever for Go, and that's why an AI they can train based off of thousands of years of data and beat it. But finance is an open-ended, it's not closed, it's open off. There's different products that are traded in finance every day. There's different companies that are IPOing, so it's just an infinite.
And then I guess you've got the quirks of human behaviour. So right. The very fact that we exist in this market means that we behave irrationally sometimes, and you can't program for irrationality very easily, because it means, by definition, it's behaving unexpected and peculiarly.
Yeah, by definition, right? Yeah. So, we have, even on our end, we're constantly monitoring, even though we do high frequency, we have humans every day that monitor the trading strategies, and more chances than not, something goes wrong. And the human has to come in and be like, oh, the machine messed up again. Oh, this weird event happened that the machine couldn't predict because it's never happened before. If there's no historical data on it, then the machine can't tell the future, right? Yeah. But for a human, I can at least predict that have a hunch that something's going to happen, or hear about it from somebody else, or watch the news and know, oh crap, there's going to be this big event happening, right? Yeah. So it's interesting.
Tell me a little bit about your backstory then. What exactly got you into being a high frequency trader? So I think you started off. Did you start off, did I read somewhere, in your dorm room or something crazy like this?
Yeah, so it was really random. No kid grows up being like, I want to be a high frequency trader. No.
I don't think, most kids probably wouldn't know what a high frequency trader is. They want to be the next Google engineer or something, don't they?
Yeah.
So go on.
I don't want to work in finance. I never wanted to work in finance for sure. But what happened was I wanted to do biology, interned in a biolab, and it was a really long process. Like, in terms of the feedback cycle, I'm literally alone in a room at 2 a.m., windowless room, feeding rats in like a biolab, and it was miserable. And then the project was over, 8 months later, and I talked to the PhDs and I'm working with, and they're like, I'm like, what's going to happen? Are we going to get published? And they're like, we don't have the budget. Sorry, we can't do this. And then I realized, oh my goodness, like, this feedback cycle is miserable in some of these, not to say anything bad about that industry, because it's great and we need really good researchers and doctors, but I personally preferred an industry with a faster, and I guess I went to the opposite extreme of high frequency, where the feedback loop is so fast.
Is less than instantaneous almost, isn't it?
I mean, we make thousands of trades per day. So for better or worse, I go home every day. I know exactly how I did. Yeah. I know exactly how I did compared to my team, compared to the rest of the world. Like, I just kind of know. And, if we had a bad day, I've learned over time, don't be emotional. Try to separate your own mental state from your fund's performance. It's so important to do that. So anyway, then I decided, okay, let's go into this quick feedback cycle stuff. And finance was, really practical in college. So decided to change my major to finance and got a bunch of internships, and then slowly but surely got more and more into quant. Just because I just like it. It's really hard to describe. It's like you just have when you like something and then you don't really have a reason for it. It's just kind of like, well, I like the feedback cycle, and I like the people I get to work with, and I just like waking up every morning and doing it. So.
I guess one of the interesting things you said there is that there's a sense that many investors focus too much on the short term in terms of have they made money today, and it seems almost that high frequency trading is ultra short term, but in a sense it's not, is it? Because you're still taking long term you're still measuring yourself on a long term basis. You're still investing for the long term. You just happen to be trading very frequently. So it doesn't negate the argument that actually investors should focus on the long term returns and not focus on the short day to day movements. Every day you make money is better than days you don't make money, but you still need to invest over the longer term.
100%. So we're hedge fund structures. We have all of our clients are mostly external investors, and we judge. Whenever we have potential investors who want to invest, we always judge them based on how they view that. Because if they're very short term in their mindset and very narrow minded, it doesn't bode well. Every fund has a bad. Every single hedge fund has a bad week, month, year. And some investors they just can't handle that very well, and so we have to tell them like, look, just because. You hear in the news a lot of high frequency funds, they never have a losing day. But, the reality is these days, it's very common to have a lot of losing days in the fund. And you have to get used to that. And so long as you think about the longer term portfolio, the overall performance, and also the exposures you have, because you want to, hopefully some of our investors treat us as it's called a satellite fund, where we're not a core part of their portfolio, but they'll allocate a little bit to us because we're taking a risk in a really interesting kind of niche area. So we're like a niche fund in their portfolios, and that's okay so long as we know where we fit and where we fit into that larger picture. So 100% the long term matters. Yeah.
One of the things, Christina, that I know you're quite passionate about and quite interested in, obviously from your work, but is artificial intelligence. And we've talked about that a little bit, but it is a scary concept. You think of computers taking over and the brains that are better than the best human minds can be. What's your thinking on this subject matter as someone who works in this industry and uses computing power to make your life easier and be successful?
Right. So it's funny because as crazy as my job is and stuff, I'm actually a huge skeptic of most everything we do, actually, including AI. I think one of the biggest issues in AI today is there's a lot of it's being used as justification for discrimination a lot of times. So police will use AI, for instance, to scan people's faces, and and chances are all these AIs, like black faces, dark skinned faces, tend to have a much higher chance of getting a false positive, like, oh, they're a criminal, when they're actually not. And that was also based on just human bias and judgment and bias in the human data to begin with. So
because it is humans that create the rules, and
right.
So the AI is interpreting them, then it evolves. Right. But it can only base it on what's given to start with, right?
Exactly. Or even Western, AI has a bias towards Western cultures. So when you Google wedding, right, you see these weddings with white dresses and like the usual Western wedding. But what about a traditional African style wedding, a Japanese style wedding? Google and AI wouldn't recognize that today. And that scares me, because that means there's so much. All the training is being done in Silicon Valley on a very specific type of face, on a very specific type of culture, and there's not enough done like around the world, and so that lack of diversity in AI will harm us, I think, at the end of the day, if we're not careful.
Do you think finance has the same lack of diversity in it when it comes to analysing, interpreting, or putting data into systems? Finance has done a pretty poor job of bringing minorities and women into the industry. Mm-hmm. And is that a problem of input, again, in terms of what the models are then going to be doing as a result of not having the diversity of cognitive thought?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We experienced it. I mean, I experienced it personally in my company when we're trying to hire people, and my naive mindset, 5-6 years ago, was like, let's try to hire the smartest people. They're all like these older guys, right? Which is great. Like they're really talented. Let's hire the smartest people in this industry. And of course, they're all these guys who pioneered this space, high frequency trading. They come onto our team, and then we realize quickly, wait a second, something's not right. The strategies they're running, they don't work anymore. They made like $100 million in 2008 with that strategy. Not in 2018. No, it doesn't.
The world's
work.
moved on.
The world has moved way along. It's really like long past that time. So then we realized, okay, let's hire some younger folks from college, to diversify our team now. And the younger folks come on board and they're like, hey, have you heard about this new technology? Have you heard about this new open source product? And we're like, oh, these are really interesting. These data frameworks that we've never worked with before. And we've been able to incorporate some of those into the company. And just even having someone question the status quo of high frequency and what we've been doing for so many years is super, super helpful. I think for any company in general, having someone come on board and kind of question the status quo, it really pushes you and challenges you.
The analogy could actually be extended a little bit to say, well, if you're sitting at home listening to this show, you're in your mid-40s perhaps, as the host might be, then you probably should be asking friends, children, and people like that as to question your own portfolio as to why on earth don't you have this stock in it? And then you say, what stock? And you go, well, this thing that we all use in our day-to-day lives, why are you not investing in that as an investor? Because it challenges your one's mindset as to what you think is technology. Other people who are using it in different ways have a completely novel and in completely different interpretation of the whole thing.
100%. Yeah, we've had situations like that happen where, sometimes we do a little bit of analysis on certain companies, and for ESG purposes, we'll look at companies like Tesla, and people with an older mindset, they have a different view than we realize people who are a lot younger coming out of college, and they're big fans of Elon Musk and stuff. So there's some companies that are polarizing and dividing, but it's good to have those discussions and that discourse rather than not. So,
but let me ask you, if I may, one question, because you said Tesla. Then I'm not going to pick on Tesla, although many people do. But it's interesting to hear someone who does high frequency trading say they do research on a company.
So it's not a part of our strategies, but we kind of just research for fun, on the side. And it's just interesting because I think I'm personally just interested in ESG in general. And I love seeing you compare, there's a couple of ESG companies that provide ESG scoring for different firms, and Bloomberg and like MSCI being two big ones. And it's funny because if you look at Tesla, I think at one point one company scored Tesla really high on the ESG scale because
batteries,
batteries. Yeah. But then another company scored Tesla really low. And so it's like, why is there there's no consensus on, some of these firms, right? And the biggest difference was because, Tesla has poor governance. Yeah. So it's like, well, how do you measure that? And it's really up to, you and your team and whoever you have to really decide at the end of the day.
Well, look, thank you, Christina. It's been a pleasure having you on the show this morning. Thank you very much for joining us. And enjoy the rest of your time here in Cayman and enjoy some of our beautiful sunshine.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you. This has been a thoroughly interesting conversation that I rather wish we had just a little more time for. But sadly, as always on Money Sense, we are out of time when the conversation could have so much more to go. Therefore, Christina, thank you very much for joining us and also for educating us on the role of high-frequency trading and giving us a little insight into the role of technology in the investment industry, an area that each and every one of us should be ever increasingly mindful of. Our show is almost over, but before we are, let me just hope that our listeners enjoyed it. Thank you to our guests for joining us, and remind everyone that the show will be available as a podcast on the CFA Society Cayman Islands webpage, and encourage you, if you have any questions or topics that you wish us to cover, to please email us at moneysense@candw.ky or tweet us at moneysenseradio. Our final note is that we're hoping in the near future to launch a personal finance version of the show that will take place perhaps quarterly. So start thinking of questions you might have for investment professionals, whether it be about a mortgage, whether it be about savings. Put them together, and then we'll let you know more about when you can send those in and what show will actually be answering those for you. With that, let me say thank you again and remind you that Money Sense will be with you again in 2 weeks' time.